next 18 months, Britain is going to experience a series of cascading economic shocks that will fundamentally alter what it means to live in this country. And the most alarming part, most people think this is just typical British pessimism. They believe the UK has weathered worse storms, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the chaos of the 1970s, the 2008 financial crisis. We'll muddle through like we always do, right? Except this time is categorically different. Because what's approaching isn't a single crisis we can solve with austerity or stimulus. It's 5 interconnected breakdowns happening simultaneously, each one feeding into the others, creating a downward spiral with no obvious exit strategy. And by the end of this analysis, you're going to understand exactly why the next 18 months will determine whether Britain remains a developed economy or slides into managed decline, so severe that future generations will look back and ask, why didn't anyone do something when there was still time? This is London. It has 215,700 millionaires, 516 centimillionaires, and 45 billionaires. London is extraordinarily wealthy, but the rest of the UK, not so much. In fact, British citizens outside the capital have less disposable income than the poorest 5 US states and below the average OECD country. If you remove London and the southeast from the equation, the UK's GDP per capita drops by 14%. Life expectancy in parts of Blackpool is lower than in Rwanda. Entire cities and towns that once thrived now rank among the poorest regions in Western Europe. But here's what most analyses miss. This isn't just about inequality. This is about a structural economic model that's reaching its breaking point. And when it breaks, and it will break, the consequences will be far more severe than most people realise. The window to prepare is closing rapidly. So let's connect the dots on how Britain got here, why the current trajectory is unsustainable, and what actually happens when an advanced economy enters terminal decline. Section 1. The Thatcher Revolution. Our story begins in 1979. Margaret Thatcher is elected Prime Minister with a singular mission: control inflation. In the lead up to her election, inflation had spiraled completely out of control. £100 in 1970 was worth over £300 by 1979. At the same time, wages kept rising as powerful trade unions demanded more pay to keep up with rising prices. This created a vicious cycle. Rising prices led to rising wages, which led to rising prices, and so on. Add loose monetary and fiscal policies that flooded the economy with money, and you have a recipe for disaster. Guided by hardline monetarists, Thatcher made inflation enemy number 1. Her strategy was straightforward but brutal. First, reduce the money supply. The Thatcher government set out to strangle money supply, cutting sterling M3 growth from 12% per year to just 6% by 1984. Second, raise interest rates dramatically. In June 1979, she increased rates from 12% to 14%, then again to 17% in November, the highest in British history. The idea was simple: make borrowing expensive, slow down credit, and choke off inflation. Although this helped stamp down inflation, a stronger pound made British exports uncompetitive abroad, while sky-high borrowing costs crippled businesses at home. Manufacturers couldn't invest, couldn't expand, and in many cases couldn't even keep the lights on. Third, cut government spending. The Thatcher government aimed to cut public sector borrowing from 4.7% of GDP in 1979 to just 1.5% by 1983. And while in the middle of a recession, they did the unthinkable. They raised taxes. Britain was already in trouble. More than 2 million people were out of work, and every month another 100,000 joined the unemployment lines. It was so shocking that 364 economists signed a letter to the Times saying the policy had no basis in economic theory. So did it work? Yes. Inflation decreased from 13% in 1979 to 5% by 1983. But at what cost? High interest rates, a strong pound, and spending cuts crushed manufacturing towns across the United Kingdom. Britain's industrial base was gutted, and regional inequality began to take shape. Section 2. The London Boom. Meanwhile, London was living a very different story. Predominantly a service-based economy, London was able to hold on while the rest of the country collapsed. By the mid-1980s, joblessness in Northern England, Scotland and Wales all pushed past 15%. The South East and London stayed under 10%. But why was this the case? Enter the Big Bang. In 1986, Thatcher unleashed a massive deregulation package that transformed London into a financial superpower. Fixed commissions were scrapped. Exchange controls were eliminated. The single capacity rule ended. Foreign ownership was welcomed. Electronic trading was unleashed. The result? International banks poured £450 million into the city. 1,500 new millionaires were minted, and London cemented itself as the world's dominant financial centre, alongside New York. Britain was richer, but this data doesn't show the whole picture. During the same period, the Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, increased from 25 to 35. While GDP per capita rose by 30%, inequality rose by 40%. So although Britain was richer, it was becoming fundamentally more unequal. This was partly due to the extreme cost of Thatcher's policies on Britain's industrial base. In 1979, manufacturing accounted for nearly 30% of the UK's GDP. By 1990, it had fallen to 16%. Manufacturing employment fell by nearly 40% from 1979 to 1993. Yes, GDP rose, GDP per capita increased, but if you didn't live in London, it wasn't obvious. Section 3. The Jobs Multiplier. Another way to examine the impact of shifting industries is the relationship between direct and indirect jobs created. If you open a factory selling widgets, you might hire 100 people directly, but to make your widgets, you need steel, electricity, distributors, and more. Your factory might support an additional 300 indirect jobs, giving a ratio of 1 direct job to every 3 indirect jobs. If we look at banking, the total is around 200 indirect jobs per 100 direct jobs, a ratio of 1 to 2. But if we look at iron manufacturing, the total is over 900 indirect jobs per 100 direct jobs, a ratio of 1 to 9. This is one of the reasons service-based industries lead to higher GDP but increase inequality as earnings become more concentrated among a smaller group of individuals. But this isn't simply about job creation. It's also about wages and benefits. Manufacturing jobs were characterized by formal employment agreements with strong benefits, retirement plans, paid holidays, insurance, and sick leave. Alternatives for the majority low-skilled manufacturing workforce did not have these characteristics. And remember, the UK's industrial base is deeply regionalised. So although there might be jobs and wage growth in the south, pockets that historically relied on out-of-favour industries became hollowed out. Today, not a single region in the UK north of London has a GDP per capita higher than the UK average. Let that sink in. Every region in the UK, excluding London and the South East, is poorer than the national average. Section 4. The Mobility Trap. Many economists believed there would be significant migration to London from other parts of the UK, but they were wrong. Even though people in the UK move between regions at a higher rate than other G7 countries, London is the exception. Britons move away from London more than they move to London. London is one of the only cities in the UK with a negative internal mobility rate. But how does that make sense, especially when median household incomes in London are 14% higher than the UK average? The answer is simple. When you factor in living costs, particularly housing, household incomes are only 1% higher in London. So unless you're in the top quartile of earners, it makes no sense to move. Housing in London is nearly 2 times greater than the UK average. And when you consider what you get for your money, it's even more expensive. It's no surprise that London has a major homelessness problem. Homelessness advocates counted over 13,000 rough sleepers in London in 2024, a 10% increase from the year prior and a 63% increase from a decade ago. Overall, 2% of Londoners are considered homeless. Compare that to New York at 0.8%, Toronto at 0.5%, Paris at 0.3%, Berlin at 0.3%, and Amsterdam at 0.2%. London is in a league of its own. Section 5. The housing disaster. One of the reasons for housing struggles is the right-to-buy scheme that Margaret Thatcher introduced in 1980. The idea was to privatise social housing by allowing tenants to purchase their homes at steep discounts from the government. Initially, discounts were 33% for houses and 50% for flats, later raised to 70%. The government was allowing people to buy properties at steep discounts to market value without any promise of ensuring housing stock would remain affordable. This policy economically benefited the current generation at the expense of future generations. Local authorities had to offer mortgages with no deposit. If you bought a property for 0% down at a 70% discount, then sold it for market value a few years later, untaxed, you'd be laughing all the way to the bank. The problem was particularly acute in London. In 1980, London had around 715,000 of these homes, representing nearly 30% of the entire housing stock. Today, only 390,000 remain. Social housing now comprises around 10% of housing stock, a decrease of 61%. Across the UK, it's estimated that at least 40% of right-to-buy homes are now rented at market rates. But there are more reasons for London's skyrocketing housing prices. There are no legal restrictions for foreign nationals to purchase property in London. Millionaires and billionaires from abroad have no barrier to buying, and they take advantage. Roughly 27% of total residential property sales in London in Q1 of 2024 were to foreign buyers. In New York, that figure is 0.3%, a 90 times difference. Over 20% of new rental properties in London have at least one foreign shareholder, doubling from 2016. One reason for this was the UK's non-dom tax status, which has now been largely abolished. This enabled UK residents who claimed their permanent home was abroad to avoid paying UK tax on foreign income and capital gains. Countries around the world love the idea of rich people spending money in their country, but it always leads to housing dislocations. Sydney, Melbourne, and Vancouver all fell into this trap. Moreover, these wealthy individuals don't contribute to the economy in the same way. They aren't taking care of the sick and elderly. They aren't opening businesses and employing people locally. They aren't working at all. They simply buy luxury homes and cars, eat out and sleep. They contribute a little to the economy, but they're nothing more than a way to pad statistics, all at the expense of local people. Section 6. Infrastructure neglect. Housing is only one piece of the puzzle. The deeper issue is where Britain puts its money. And for decades, the answer has been simple: London. When most people visit London, they complain about the tube and poor infrastructure. Clearly, these people haven't been to other parts of the country. If you look at transport investment in the UK, London gets nearly £1,200 per person. Compare that to the North East at just £430 and the East Midlands at £350. Even the South East, the closest region, barely gets half of what London receives. To put it in perspective, if the North had been funded at the same per-person rate as London, it would have seen an extra £140 billion of investment. That's the equivalent of building 7 Elizabeth lines. To make matters worse, Britain underspends on transport compared to its peers. OECD data shows the UK put just 0.3% of GDP per year into roads between 1995 and 2020. Compare this to Italy at 0.4%, Germany and the US at 0.5%, and France at over 0.6%. The tragedy is that this underinvestment makes Britain's cities less productive. With weak road and rail links, cities outside London have far less effective size. Fewer people can commute, fewer jobs are connected, less growth is possible. And it's not just transport. The same neglect shows up in research and development. R&D expenditure is heavily concentrated in higher productivity, higher income locations, London. In 2016, the government spent just £21 per person on R&D in the north of England, and £14 in the Midlands. In London, it was £60. This creates a reinforcing loop. More R&D means London firms grow faster, which attracts more private capital, which funds even more R&D. There is merit to prioritising government R&D investment into areas where there is business R&D investment. But that isn't even what the UK is doing. Areas like London receive more government R&D support relative to the amount of business R&D in the region, whilst the rest of the UK receives less. Put simply, businesses outside of London are being deprioritised in favour of those in London. Section 7. The doom loop. Now here's where this gets truly dangerous. Each of these problems would be manageable on its own. Regional inequality, painful but addressable. Housing crisis, expensive but fixable. Infrastructure decay, challenging but not impossible. But all of them happening simultaneously. That's when you get systemic collapse. Because they're not separate problems. They're interconnected and mutually reinforcing. The housing crisis prevents workers from moving to where jobs are, reducing economic efficiency and deepening stagnation. Infrastructure neglect makes regions outside London less attractive for investment, concentrating even more economic activity in the capital, which worsens regional inequality. Regional inequality creates political division and social fracture, preventing consensus on the difficult reforms needed to address economic stagnation. It's a doom loop. Each problem makes the others harder to solve, and we're trapped in it right now. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Northern Ireland's power grid nearly collapsed last winter. A combination of aging infrastructure, increased demand, and supply constraints brought the system to the brink of total failure. If the grid had gone down, it would have taken days to bring it back up. Hospitals would have been on emergency generators. No heating in homes during winter. Businesses shut. Food spoilage. Economic devastation. They managed to avoid it through emergency load shedding and appealing to businesses to reduce consumption, but it was terrifyingly close. And here's the key point. All the factors that nearly caused that collapse are still present. Nothing has been fixed. The infrastructure is still aging. Demand is still rising. Supply is still constrained. It's going to happen again. And next time, they might not be able to prevent it. That's not just a Northern Ireland problem. That's a preview of what's coming to the rest of the UK as infrastructure decay, energy vulnerability, and lack of investment converge. Section 8. Council bankruptcies. Or look at council bankruptcies. Birmingham isn't some unfortunate anomaly. It's the leading edge of a wave. Dozens of councils are on the brink. When a council goes bankrupt, it stops providing non-essential services. Libraries close, youth programs end, roads don't get repaired, parks aren't maintained, social care gets cut to the legal minimum. The places that become unlivable first will be the ones with bankrupt councils and declining populations. Young people will leave, taking their tax revenue with them. This makes the council's finances worse. More service cuts follow, more people leave. The doom loop accelerates. This isn't speculation. It's already happening in parts of the former industrial North and Wales. The UK is now the only major economy where real wages today are lower than they were in 2008. 17 years, and the average worker is poorer now than they were then. That's unprecedented in modern British history. Productivity growth, the key driver of long-term prosperity, has completely stalled. UK productivity is now 20% below France and Germany. That means a French worker produces in 4 days what a British worker takes 5 days to produce. Business investment is the lowest in the G7. Companies look at the UK and decide to invest their money elsewhere. Factories get built in Poland, not Birmingham. Tech hubs emerge in Berlin, not Manchester. Section 9. The demographic time bomb. But perhaps the most terrifying crisis is the one nobody wants to talk about: demographics. The UK birth rate has collapsed to 1.49 children per woman. That's well below the replacement rate of 2.1. We're not having enough children to replace the current population. You might think less people means less pressure on housing and services. Wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The population isn't shrinking evenly across age groups. Young people aren't having kids, but old people are living longer than ever. What you get is a rapidly aging population with fewer and fewer working-age people to support them. Right now, there are approximately 3 working-age people for every pensioner. By 2040, that ratio will be 2 to 1. By 2050, it could approach 1 to 1. Think about what that means economically. One worker trying to generate enough tax revenue to support one pensioner's state pension, NHS care, and social services. It's mathematically impossible. The system collapses. Japan is already experiencing this. Their economy has stagnated for 30 years because they got old before they got rich. Their society is heading toward demographic extinction. Within a century, the UK is following the exact same trajectory, just 10 to 15 years behind. Before you say immigration will solve it, understand this: we need net immigration of roughly 1 million people per year, every year, indefinitely, just to maintain the current age structure. That's politically impossible. The public won't accept it, but without it, the demographic math doesn't work. Without economic growth, everything else collapses. You can't fund the NHS without growth. You can't pay pensions without growth. You can't maintain infrastructure without growth. An economy that doesn't grow is an economy in decline, and we've been in decline for over a decade. Most people just haven't realized it yet because the decline has been gradual enough to normalize. Section 10. The timeline. So when does this all come to a head? The honest answer is it's already started. We're in the early stages of collapse right now, but most people don't recognize it because collapse isn't a single dramatic moment. It's a gradual degradation that accelerates over time. Here's what the next few years probably look like. 2026. More councils declare bankruptcy. NHS waiting times hit record levels, forcing more people into private healthcare they can't afford. Energy bills remain elevated. Real wages continue falling. Social unrest increases. Nothing catastrophic yet, just everything getting measurably worse. 2027. First major infrastructure failure. Either a regional power blackout, a water crisis in a major city, or a critical transport failure. The government responds with emergency measures and promises to fix things. They won't have the money to actually fix things. People start to realize the decline is structural, not temporary. 2028 to 2029. Economic crisis. Either a recession triggered by external factors or a homegrown crisis from unsustainable debt levels. Unemployment spikes, government debt servicing costs become unsustainable. Serious austerity begins, not the 2010 version, but real cuts to core services that people genuinely feel. 2030 onwards, social breaking point. Protests, strikes, possibly riots. The social compact between government and governed breaks down. Political instability follows. Governments can't last full terms because nothing they try works. This isn't inevitable. Technically, it could be prevented, but prevention would require political consensus on radical reforms that impose short-term pain for long-term gain. Massive infrastructure investment, comprehensive tax reform, pension and healthcare system restructuring, serious productivity improvements. But look at British politics. Does that seem likely? We can't even agree on basic facts, let alone radical reforms. Every proposal gets attacked from all sides. Nothing substantial can pass. We're trapped in political gridlock, while the underlying problems get worse. Section 11. What to do. So what do you actually do if you're watching this and thinking, okay, I understand the problems, but what's my move here? First, recognize that you cannot rely on the state for your future security. Not pensions, not healthcare, not social care. Plan as if these things won't exist in any meaningful form by the time you need them. Second, build geographical optionality. If you've got skills that travel, research where else you could live. Know your options, know the requirements, have a plan B that isn't just hoping things get better in Britain. Third, invest in portable assets. If you own property in the UK, that's fine, but recognise it's very illiquid and very local. Diversify into assets that move with you. Stocks, particularly international stocks, skills and education that are globally recognised. Professional networks across borders. Fourth, build resilience. We're entering a period of potential energy, water, and infrastructure disruptions. Having some level of personal resilience, backup power, water storage, basic emergency supplies isn't prepper paranoia anymore. It's sensible preparation for likely scenarios. Fifth, community matters more than ever. If things deteriorate significantly, strong social networks become critical. Know your neighbours, build relationships, Communities that work together survive disruptions much better than atomized individuals. Sixth, protect yourself from financial collapse. Don't keep all your savings in UK banks. Diversify across institutions and jurisdictions. Consider some holdings in harder currencies or assets that preserve value during currency devaluation. Closing. The United Kingdom is a shell of its former self. What once was a prosperous country has become a mostly vestigial nation with a single thriving city. Tony Blair once promised that the kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us. But 2 decades later, the only thing reordered has been the United Kingdom around London. The tragedy is that Britain still has the ingredients for prosperity. But until they can spread opportunity beyond London, that promise will remain broken. Yes, Britain still has money. They still have power. They still have prestige. But it's concentrated in a few square miles along the Thames. For everyone else, the empire is gone, the factories are gone, and the future is shrinking. London sits and eats Michelin star food, while the rest of the UK eats scraps in the alleyways, like stray cats. So here's my question for you. Can the UK reverse this trajectory, or are we watching the managed decline of a former superpower in real time? Share your analysis in the comments below.